In this question, it says a lead pellet is shot vertically upwards. It is shot up vertically upwards into a clay block which is stationary. So, which means that for the clay block, initially the speed is 0 since it is stationary. So, let's take note of that. It is stationary. So, our speed or our u is 0 at the moment of impact, but is able to rise freely after the impact. The mass of the pellet is 5 grams, and the mass of the clay dough is 95 grams. The pellet hits the block with initial vertical velocity of 200 meters per second. So the initial velocity of the pellet is 200, as is stated. It embeds itself in the block and does not emerge. So, which means that after the collision, they are now moving with the same velocity, which is something very important. So, in this question, you are going to use the conservation of momentum, which states that in an isolated system, the sum of momentum before collision is equal to the sum of momentum after the collision. So if my u is initial, I will say that m1 u1 plus m2 u2 must be equal to m1 v1 plus m2 v2, where my u1 is the initial velocity of the lead pellet and u2 is the initial velocity of the stationary clay block, and v1 is the final velocity of the lead pellet and v2 is the final velocity of the clay dough. So when I do my substitution, the mass of the pellet is 5 grams. But remember, let's change it to kilograms. So that will give us 0.005 kilogram times the initial velocity of the pellet, which is 200. But the initial momentum of the clay block will be 0 since it was stationary. So, but anyway, if I complete that, it will be plus. My mass is 0.095 times 0, so which will give me 0. This is equal to, so for the momentum after the collision, my mass in this case, for the first one, it hasn't changed, which is still 0.005. But remember, the body is now moving at the same velocity, which means that this V1 and V2, they are the same. So I can say this is V plus, here also the mass of the clay block will be 0.095 and moving at the same velocity. So I can say this also V. So now that this V and this V are the same, I can factor that out. So this one here becomes 0. So 0.005 times 200 will give me 1, which is equal to, I factor my V out. So I have here 0.005 plus 0.095. So 1 is equal to 0.1 V. So my V is equal to 10 meters per second. Very important. So which means that now I have my V. So I've analyzed the momentum aspect. But remember, after the impact, the body is able to move freely upwards. That's what the question says. So which means that at the time that it hit this particular clay and the clay is moving up, this 10 that you are seeing here will now be the initial velocity of the clay blocks, which means that from the time it hits, my u, which is the initial velocity as the clay is moving, will now be 10. Now, it says that how high above its initial position, that is, they're talking about the clay, will the block rise? So in other words, at that particular velocity, at that particular height, the velocity will be 0 because that's how high it can rise. So that will be the maximum height. So at that particular height, which we are coming to look for, our v is equal to 0. Very important. So obviously we have our acceleration due to gravity, which in this case will be 9.81, which is a constant. What we are looking for now is our distance, which is s. That's what we are looking for. So if you look at our Shewhart equation, the only formula or the formula that will work best will be v squared equals u squared plus 2gs or 2as. But remember, the body is rising up, so our g here becomes negative. So let's take note of that. So let's substitute our values. So as I mentioned, at the maximum height that it can rise, the final velocity will be 0. So here is 0 squared equal to, and as the pellet hits this clay dough, that is when it started moving. So that speed that we are getting here will be the initial velocity of the clay block as it moves up. So our u becomes 10 squared. So remember, it is rising up, so our g becomes minus, so I have here minus 2 into bracket 9.81 times my distance s, which is what I'm looking for. When I simplify it, I will get 19.62s to be equal to 100. My s is now equal to 100 divided by 19.62, which is equal to 5.1 meters. So my answer is A.